Hey, good morning. Welcome back to Woodstock City. We're so glad you are here. Thanks for joining us today. It is going to be a wonderful day. If you're here for the first time, my name is Gavin. I'm on staff here. And over the next hour, we're going to have a wonderful time. We're going to sing some songs together. I hope you like doing that. If you don't know the words, no big deal. They'll be on the screen. And if you don't feel comfortable singing, I've got wonderful news for you today. The music will be loud enough that no one will leave because of you. So feel free to sing out all you want. And then today we're starting a 2-week conversation with Andy Stanley. Andy is the leader of this network of churches, and we're going to talk about how to deal with mean people and what do you do about them and with them. So over the next 2 weeks, if you don't have any mean people in your life, you don't need to come back, but you pretty much do. So no elbows, by the way. That's super awkward in church. So we're going to talk about that for the next 2 weeks. It's going to be really, really helpful and I think very fun. Now, 2 things I want to let you know about that are coming up that are really big deals for us. The first one is back to school drive. We do this every single year. Now, I want you to go back a few years or maybe in your life, 5 years or 5 decades. I don't know. But do you remember the night before school, the night before the first day of going back to school? It was such an exciting time. It was like you couldn't sleep, but not because of Christmas. It was like the not Christmas, but you still couldn't sleep. You were so excited. Maybe you packed your backpack the night before, laid your clothes out. That's what I would do with my socks and shoes. I like to coordinate, still do. So you remember that night? We want to make that possible for every single kid in our community. And the reality is, and we probably don't all recognize this, but it isn't true for all the kids in our community. That's why we do a backpack drive. We want to send every kid in this community back to school with all the supplies they need so that they can start the year successfully. And you can be a part of doing that by helping us beginning next week. So I have a couple weeks of collection here at Woodstock City. If you're watching online, just drop it off during the week or just drop it off on Sunday morning. You can drive through and do that. We would love for you to participate because if we all do, we can make every kid go back to school and have the best start to this new school year. So we're going to give you a card on the way out with all the details. Obviously, you can go to woodstockcity.org to learn more. Now, one more thing to tell you about. We're going to have a parenting summit coming up in just a couple of weeks. If you have kids, you need to go to a summit because raising kids is the hardest thing that we ever really do. It's the hardest job we have. And the reason is that the kids have their own brains. That's the problem with kids. They have their own wirings, their own personalities, their own independence. The more we can learn about our kids individually, the better we can parent them individually. That's what we should be doing. And so we're going to talk about our kids' wiring and how we parent each kid differently based on how God made them. So we'd love for you to come to this parent summit. The RSVP for it, it's not open for everybody. We need you to RSVP for it so we can count, make sure we have the right number of people here. It is open today. So if you go to woodstockcity.org, again, you can research that and you can sign up for the Parent Summit. If you have any questions about any of that stuff, on your way out, we're going to give you the card with information. You can always stop by the rotunda. There's this big glass room called Next. We have some great staff and volunteers. They'd love to meet you. If you ever have a question about our church, that's the best place to go. And one more thing, if you came in today maybe carrying something, you came in today wanting to maybe talk to a pastor, maybe pray with somebody, we have an area for that as well. It's called the gallery. If you go out these doors and take a left, at the end of the hall there's a space called the gallery. We have our care staff in there and some really, really incredible volunteers. They'd love to meet with you, talk with you, pray with you, maybe even refer you to some extra help. So if that's something you came in here today hoping to find, we got you covered. All right, hey, we're ready to sing some before we get into this brand new conversation with Andy. So as Brooke and Clay and Joy come up to lead us in some worship, we'd love for you to stand up. Just tell somebody beside you hello, and we'll get ready to sing together. Here we go.
So good to see you all here this morning. Let's just take a moment and remind ourselves who we are in Jesus. Come on. Who am I that the highest you would welcome? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Come on. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I
Speak to me when the silence steals my voice. You understand me. You understand me. And come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. rest He wants to give us. Sing this with me. I will rest in the Father. Leave the rest. If you have burdens, bring them to Him. I will rest. His grace is pouring out. Leave the rest in the Father's hands.
We can rest in who you are. Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name one greater, no one kinder, no one more gracious, no one more powerful. No one loves quite like you do. When we think about the fact that you would come to experience everything that we experience, come from heaven to be a person to live with us, among us, and that you didn't stop there, but you died on our behalf. And then you rose again with all victory and all power. And today we live with that power because you are victorious. Jesus, would you help us to see who we are in you? Jesus, would you make us aware of who you've called us to be, who you created us to be light, to be the kindness and the love that we've received from you, to show that to others. And God, I know that some of us are walking through some things this morning that seem dark and dismal. But I thank you that your power even extends to that. That your power is the light that guides us through those moments. So we thank you for that. We claim victory for that in your name. We love being your children. So God, would you hear our praise? And would you teach us just a little bit more about you? It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for singing. Y'all can have a seat.
So today is part one of a two-part series entitled Mean People and What to Do About Them. Mean People and What to Do About Them. I thought about entitling this series Bad People and What to Do About Them, but we hesitate to call anybody bad. We say things like this, like, he's really not a bad person. Isn't this what we say? He's really not a bad person. He just does bad things, like a lot, which I think that's what it means to be a bad person. But so we're not going to do bad person, we're going to do mean person. We're going to stick with mean people, and specifically, what should we do about the mean people in our lives? And by mean, I mean mean. These are the unpleasant people. These are the deceptive people. These are the people that control us with time or money or with our children. These are the users. They're just unkind. It may be that person that when you see them coming, you just don't want to interact with them because, well, there's just no other way to say it. They're just mean. And to be clear, this isn't to say that we're not often mean. I mean, all of us have been mean at some point. In fact, there's somebody maybe who's going to see or hear this message, and unfortunately, we're going to come to mind. But generally, what we talk about when we're together is how to live a life in such a way and to live our lives in such a way that we're not the mean people. So we're not discounting the fact that from time to time we can be mean and certainly have the potential to be perhaps as mean as the meanest person we've ever met. But these two messages are going to focus on how to respond to and how to react to the mean people in our lives. Now, the reason this is so important is if you don't have a plan, and if I don't have a plan, if we're not prepared, and honestly, as we're going to see, if we're not somewhat proactive, here's what happens, and we've all experienced this. The mean people in our lives, ultimately, they gain a measure of control over our lives. And before we know it, we're actually acting like they do. And it feels in the moment as if we have no choice. In fact, if somebody were to hear your story, or when you tell your story and you talk about how you've reacted to or responded to the person that, is mean to you, the person that hears your story is like, well, who could blame you? It's almost like you have no choice. And the reason it feels like we have no choice is this, that mean people, and we don't think in these terms when we're in the relationship, but mean people, without even meaning to, they just keep us
off balance. We're just always off balance. We don't know what we're walking into. We don't know how to respond. They kind of lean left and we kind of lean right, because when we're off balance, what happens? We're forced to compensate. This is why in these relationships, you feel like you're not even yourself. In fact, somebody may have said to you, you know, when you're around him, when you're around her, when you're together, I feel like you're not even yourself. Why? Because, well, when we're around these kinds of people, we are forced to compensate. If somebody walks up and pushes you off balance, everything in you, you compensate to regain your balance. But the problem with a mean person is it is virtually impossible to maintain and keep your balance. I'll give you a quick illustration. That actually is a long illustration I'm going to try to keep short. When my mom, who died when she was 82, when my mom was in her late 30s, she met a young woman in her late 20s that she helped out, and they became lifelong friends. Her name was Alice, and Alice actually used to stay with me, with my sister and me, when my parents would go out of town. So I've known Alice basically my whole life. So then when my mom was in her 70s, and basically she couldn't drive anymore, and she really needed some help at home, Alice would actually drive 45 minutes from her home. Now, Alice is in her late 60s. She would drive from her home 45 minutes to my mom's home every single week to go through my mom's mail, pay my mom's bills, balance my mom's checkbook, and just answer any questions and just spend time with my mom, which I was so grateful for. So my mom invested in her. Now she's investing in my mom. And again, it took so much pressure off of me, so extraordinarily grateful. So as my mom near the end of her life, and as she was, less and less able to take care of herself, Alice began to lose her sight. And before long, she couldn't drive any longer, and she was basically a shut-in in her own home. And then Sandra, my wife, began doing for Alice what Alice had done for my mom. She would drive over every single week, go through the mail, pay the bills, balance the checkbook, and just answer any questions that she had. And so she was kind of giving back based on what, Alice had so graciously done for my mom. So as time goes by, it becomes clear to us that Alice can't stay in her house any longer, because technically she was living alone. We'll come back to that in just a minute. And so Sandra convinced Alice that she needed to move to assisted living. Now, if anyone here has ever moved a parent or a spouse's parent to assisted living, it is so complicated. But it's even more complicated when we're trying to move somebody who is not a family member. So Sandra got an attorney. She became Alice's official legal power of attorney. And then she got another friend of Alice's to become Alice's physical or medical power of attorney. So there's kind of Team Alice, but because Alice had never married, she had no kids, she'd pretty much outlived almost all of her friends, and certainly her parents and her brother and sister. And so she's alone in the world, and so we're going to take care of Alice. So about 9 months before the process began to get her into assisted living. So the goal was get her in assisted living. In fact, Sandra found a place 2 miles from our house, because we're committed to Alice for the rest of her life. She found this place, and Alice could almost afford it based with her pension and with her Social Security, but there was going to be a gap. So the goal is get her out, clean out her house, sell her stuff, sell the house. She had a little bit of equity, put the money in the bank, and we'll just go from there. So that's the plan. Very complicated, especially when you're not related to the person. Well, anyway, about 8 or 9 months before that process began, an old friend of Alice's showed up at her front door, a gentleman in his late 60s, keeping all this straight, and he said, Alice, I'm destitute. I don't have a place to live. I've been living in my car. It's getting cold. Would it be okay if I moved in with you for just a few months? Now, Alice had been warned, and later we were warned, that this guy's name is Roger, that if you let Roger move in, you're going to have a difficult time getting Roger to move out. She had been told that, and she'd known him for a while, and somebody told us that when we heard about Roger moving in, but she allowed him to move into one of her spare bedrooms, and actually, honestly, he was pretty helpful because he could drive and he could take her to her doctor's visits. He would bring us the mail sometimes. He seemed like the nicest guy, and I couldn't imagine this was going to be a problem. Besides, he knew we're going to sell her house, and so if we sell her house, you'll probably have to move out by that point, right? So I felt like there was kind of a built-in deadline. This wouldn't be a problem. So sure enough, he was pretty helpful. Sandra did, I should say, I wouldn't say estate sale. It was more garage sale than estate sale, if you know what I mean. There wasn't a whole lot to sell, but we had an estate sale or a garage sale. Roger was actually helpful. He actually even bought some of her stuff to put in his storage unit that he said he had, which was great. Now, he wasn't paying any rent, wasn't paying any bills, wasn't buying any groceries. There was no cash outlay. He was living for free for all these months. And so we finally get Alice moved to this assisted living place close to us. That was, an event. We get the house cleaned out. We do this big garage sale. Sandra put signs out that the house is going to go up for sale. And the real estate market right now is so hot. So she starts getting calls. So now she's got to show the house, but now the house is completely empty. She sold everything and then threw everything else away. Just a mammoth, task if you've ever done that for someone. And so Sandra is, riding point on this whole process. And then we got to show the house. But the problem is there's, come see this house. It's completely empty except, don't go in that bedroom. There's an air mattress with some clothes in the closet and a computer on the floor. Don't mind the guy camping out in the house. So, it's going to be kind of hard to show this house, right? Well, so she starts showing the house. And so we're like, Roger, okay, thank you. You got to go. And he just ignores us. So Sandra gives him a deadline. He gives him 3 weeks by this date. He agreed that, hey, on that Monday, I'll be gone. Monday comes, Monday goes. He's still there. And it becomes apparent he's not moving out. In fact, because, Alice is not living, because Alice isn't living in the house right now, Sandra shut off all the, unnecessary utilities, including the television service, and she gets a bill from the television provider. She calls and says, no, I canceled that. And the person on the other end of the line said, well, somebody called and had it turned back on. And Roger had called the television provider and had the television service turned back on. And Sandra left the internet on because he said he needed internet. So this begins to escalate and escalate and escalate. So one night, and it's all we're thinking about and talking about. Every day I come home, I'm like, have you heard from Roger? Have you talked to Roger? Has Roger moved out? And we've got all these other people that are like, we got to get Roger out, but it's kind of resting on us. So we're sitting on the couch late one afternoon. Sandra calls Roger. I said, put it on speakerphone. And of course, I'm trying not to get involved because Sandra throughout the process has said, Andy, you cannot get involved because I wanted to get involved. And I only had one tool, I want to use my tool. And she's like, you can't use your tool. So they have this conversation, speakerphone. And he is so rude to Sandra. I've never heard anyone speak to my wife this way. I was so angry. And she's kind of leaning this way, and I'm reaching for the phone. I just want to take the phone and say, and she's like, no. And he's saying, I'm going to sue you. You can't kick me out. The law doesn't allow you to kick out a renter. I'm like, renter? That assumes rent. This guy's paid nothing. He's taken advantage of an 80-year-old woman. We're trying to close her house so we can put money in the bank because there's a monthly gap between her pension and Social Security to stay in this assisted living place. And he is so rude to Sandra. Okay, this is how bad it gets. So we get a contract on the house. It's full price offer plus no contingencies. It's perfect. It's more money than we thought we could get for Alice's house. And she so desperately needs this money. And so Roger, you're gonna think I'm making this up. Roger finds out who the purchaser's agent is and goes to the office of the purchasing agent, the person representing the family buying the house, goes in and says, I need you to know this is gonna be a fraudulent closing. Yes, the woman who claims to have power of attorney over this old person has manipulated the old person to get power of attorney, and she has no legal right to do this, and I'm not moving out, and you need to be careful. And it's gonna ruin this closing that Sandra has worked so hard to get us to the finish line. We're almost there. So of course, the purchasing agent calls the seller's agent, Alice's agent, and all of a sudden we're about to lose this whole deal. Now, how do you think we responded to all this? What's our response? Well, you can imagine because you can imagine your response. You know what we did? And this is kind of embarrassing, and I'm not even gonna give you the details, it's so embarrassing. We sat around day after day, night after night, coming up with the most devious, manipulative ways you can imagine to get Roger out of the house. I'm telling you, there were times we just listened to each other and think, who are we? Who have we become? We had a pesticide option I won't even go into, no lie. Then I said, you know what? I know some kind of other crazy people. We should just invite some other people to live in the house, live in Alice's Alice's house with Roger until he finally gets fed up and moves. There was the turn off the electricity and the water option, which we could have done because, Alice is paying bills for, there are others I won't even go into. But we realized what was happening. We're starting to become like Roger. We're becoming like him. We don't even like him. It was all we talked about, to the point, honestly. It was as if Roger had moved in with us because it so focused our attention every single day. How do we get Roger out of the house before this closing? We couldn't even believe somebody would give us a contract, give Alice a contract on the house because they'd never seen the house empty because there's a guy camping out in one of the bedrooms. Now, in part 2, I'm going to come back and tell you how that story resolved. So, yeah, I know. Okay. Sorry to do that. But the point is simply this, and you know this. It is so difficult to be good to people who just aren't good, right? No matter what kind of faith you have, in the moment, it is so difficult to be kind to people who just, it seems like in their heart, they're just unkind or sensitive to people who are insensitive. The golden rule, it just doesn't seem to apply. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have others. What is it? Do unto you. And this is great until somebody mistreats you. And it's great until somebody mistreats me or mistreats somebody that I love. And for me, in this particular story, it's a double-edged sword because I loved Alice and I wanted us to help Alice, but I was watching my wife be mistreated at the same time, and I'm supposed to do unto Roger as I would have Roger do unto me. And suddenly the golden rule is out the window. Now it's the iron rule. I just made this up, but you understand the iron rule. It's do unto others as they have done unto you, right? And this doesn't only feel natural. It doesn't only just feel natural to treat people the way they've treated us. In the moment, it just seems right. It just seems fair. And in fact, if I were to go into detail about some of these crazy ideas we had to get Roger out of the house, after hearing just the part of the story I've told you, you would be like, well, yeah. Why wouldn't you do all that? It just seems right. It seems fair. It seems just. It seems even. And then there's this, and maybe this is a little close to home because maybe this is part of your story, or maybe part of your story growing up, or maybe it's part of the story of your first marriage. When we're mistreated in a relationship and we feel powerless to do anything about it, again, we're off balance, we compensate, but sometimes we compensate not in the relationship with the person that threw us off balance. You've seen this happen. We compensate in another relationship. We compensate somewhere or with somebody else. I'll take it out on you because I can't take it out on him. I can't take it out on her. I can't get back at them. I can't go back into the office and take it out on the people that mistreated me at work. But I've got all this energy, I'm off balance. And then it's do unto others. It's do unto others as someone else has done unto you. So round and round and round it goes. And you know what? We've all been there at some level. Maybe not a big level, but at some level, we've all been a part of this dynamic. So here's the question. Here's what we're talking about. What do we do? What do you do about the mean people? Maybe it was your ex. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's a boss, a sister-in-law. And there's just no way to extricate yourself from the relationship because of the nature of the relationship, but they're just mean. And it's fun, I'll admit it, it's fun to daydream about getting even. But the problem, of course, is, and you know this, is that getting even makes us even. Getting even makes us even with someone that we don't even like. It makes us like someone that we dislike. So what do? You can't ignore them, right? That's impossible. And if you ignore them, you know what they do, right? They just keep chipping away. And eventually we break and we react. And then it's like we've given them even more power over us. So ignoring them isn't the way forward. And getting even isn't the way forward. But fortunately, there's a third option. It's a third option that it's not intuitive. It's a third option that actually decreases their power over us. And honestly, it's the third option that allows us to guard and protect our hearts. And it positions us, when this is said and done, to tell a much better story. Of course, the way forward is taught and modeled by Jesus, but it's also modeled in the Old Testament by a relatively unknown individual whose life intersects with the life of David. Now, many of us, if you grew up around church or in church, are familiar with who King David was. But this event doesn't take place when he's King David or even Shepherd Boy David. This event takes place when he is fugitive David. After David, as a teenager, killed Goliath, you remember that story, he becomes a hero, a national hero in Israel, in ancient Israel. And so King Saul, the king at the time, draws him in close because David's a leader, he's a national hero. You want to keep your friends close, you want to keep your potential rivals even closer. And then King Saul gets word that some rogue prophet has gone to David's home as a little boy and anointed David to be the next king of Israel. Now, this is a real problem if you're already the king, because not only do you want to finish out your years as king, you want your son, in his case, Jonathan, to become the next king. So this is now this is messing with this dynasty. So King Saul tries to kill David. David escapes. He becomes a fugitive. He's living out in the wilderness. He's had to leave his family over time because he's a leader. He attracts other men like him, other angry, mistreated outlaws. Before long, he has his own little miniature army of about 600 men, plus their wives and all their stuff. And they're outcast from society. They have no place to call home. And they're all angry because each of them have their own story of being mistreated and the injustice that had happened under King Saul. So, and David's got all this anger and all this frustration. And of course, like any of us, he's looking for a place to sort of take it out, somebody to take it out on, because King Saul is untouchable. And in this story, he finally finds a victim. And that's where the story picks up. So I'll read part of the story, and then we're going to stop in the middle, pick it up next time. So here's what happens. A certain man, this is in 1 Samuel 25, and Samuel is essentially David's biographer in a sense. A certain man in Mon who had property there in Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats. You know, and you read this in ancient times, it's like, for us, it's like, what would you do with 1,000 goats? Anyway, so he had 1,000 goats. He had garages full of cars. Think of it that way. He had 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel, and his name was Nabal. Now, sheep shearing season in ancient times, this is when wealthy people found out how much wealthier they had just become. This was like, it's like a financial report, an annual financial report. He's about to find out where he is financially, whether or not he turned a profit, and if so, how much. His name's Nabal. The text goes on and says this. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was intelligent and beautiful, but her husband was harsh and mean. There's our word. He was mean in his dealings. In fact, the Hebrew word here actually means heavy. He was a big, heavy, he was just heavy. He was difficult. He was a burden to deal with. He was just a mean person. The story continues. While David and his men were in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he hears, hey, this guy is about to find out how much wealthier he's become. So he sent 10 of his guys, he sent 10 young men and said to them, now look, I want you to go and find where Nabal is in Carmel, and I want you to greet him in my name, let him know, hey, we're coming in the name of David, and here's what I want you to say to Nabal. Somebody, write this down. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and to your household, and good health to all that is yours. This was a formal ancient greeting that said, hey, I don't know if we've met before, but I've heard good things about you, and let's be friends. And then the message went on like this. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs went missing. David is saying, hey, during the season when the sheep were out on the hills, we were around your shepherds all the time, and we never stole a thing. In fact, we watched over your flocks by night. In other words, Nabal, your profit that you're about to experience is due in part to the fact that we protected your shepherds and your sheep. And not only did we not allow our folks to steal from you, we didn't allow any of the other roving bands of bandits steal from you either. And he says, if you don't believe me, ask your own servants and they'll tell you. Therefore, would you be favorable toward my men since we come at a festive time? And please give your servants, talking about himself, and your son David, whatever you can find for them or for us. In other words, you're profiting big time. We were sort of part of the profit. So if you have anything left over or just out of the goodness of your heart, would you share with our men? So when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. And then they waited, which means they probably gave it to one of Nabal's men to give to Nabal, who they hoped would come out and say, oh, absolutely. Now, before we go on with the story, a quick word about David in this season of his life. David, and this is kind of hard for us depending on, how you view David growing up in church or Sunday school. David was a very violent man. He was not to be trifled with. In fact, when as a fugitive he lived in the land of the Philistines as on the run from King Saul, he and his men would regularly raid Philistine villages. In fact, his biographer said that this is terrible, whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or a woman alive. He didn't want there to be any witnesses. He wanted people to come over the hill and just see the smoke, and there's no one there to explain what happened to this village. He took the sheep and the cattle, donkeys and camels and clothes. He was living off the backs of other people's labor, and he would leave no one alive to tell the story. So he was dangerous even by ancient standards. He was not someone to be trifled with. So back to the story. His 10 guys are waiting. And after, he keeps Nabal, I think, intentionally keeps them waiting. I think that's why the author included that detail. Nabal finally either sends somebody else or answers himself. And here's what he says. Who is this David? You've come in the name of David. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? So he knew who David was. But he's just dissing David and his whole story and his whole family. Who is the son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. I know David's not serving King Saul anymore, but so what? A lot of people are breaking away from their masters. Your master is a nobody. He's an outlaw. I didn't ask for his help, so I don't owe him anything. Why? Excuse me. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? So no, I'm not going to help you. So David's men, the story goes on, David's men turned back around and went back. And when they arrived, they reported every word. And David said to his men, oh, well, it was worth a try. No. David, the dangerous man, David said to his men, okay, each of you, strap on your sword. Strap on your sword. Strap on your sword. So they did, the text says. And then the text adds this detail. This is so interesting. And David strapped his on as well. In other words, you mess with me and you will see. Now, there's a specific reason, I think, why the author, David's biographer actually highlights David arming himself in addition to the men arming themselves, because David's sword was like no other sword. David's sword that's mentioned in this text was actually a reminder. It was a reminder to David, it was a visual aid that he did not need to take matters into his own hands. Does anybody know where David got his sword? Anybody? Goliath, that's right. David got his sword from Goliath. So Goliath's sword, imagine this. Goliath's sword is a visual aid of God's protection. When David was just a teenager, when David marched down into the valley of Elah and faced this giant, God protected him. That God was clearly, going to come to David's aid and take care of him. He did not need to return evil for evil. He didn't need to take matters into his own hands. God had chosen David. God had anointed David. David, of all people, could trust that God was going to care for him and the people around him. But David's angry, and David's hurt, and he can't see any of that. So he does what we're all tempted to do. He powers up, and he redirects the frustration he has at King Saul, who is untouchable, toward Nabal. Text says this. So about 400 men went up with David. This was an overreaction of epic proportion. This was going to be a massacre. We've all heard that hurt people hurt people. Well, this is an example of hunted people. They hunt people. And so he sets out. And he sets out doing what we do when we set out in a similar situation. He sets out internally building up a head of steam, building up a case to justify what he's not 100% sure he should be doing. You ever do that? You have those imaginary conversations with the person that is mean to you, and you're gonna get back at them. And in your mind, or I'll say in my mind, when I have an imaginary conversation with someone, there's usually a crowd standing around in my imagination. And I have the final one-liner, and everybody in the crowd's like, oh, and they're completely humiliated. Is it just me? No, we have those imaginary conversations like how we're gonna get even, how we're gonna get back at that person. Hey, Sandra, I got an idea. Actually, this was her idea. Let's go in, it might've been my idea. Let's go in when he's not there and just slit the air mattress, take all of his clothes, his computer, and put it out on the front in the yard and just change the locks. We would be justified, right? Again, that might have been Sandra's idea. I don't know. Anyway, so here's what the text says. This is so interesting because we get in David's head. This is so fascinating. David had just said, so now they're mounted up. He's got 400 warriors. They're making their way down to the valley, to the plain where Nabal is shearing sheep. David had just said, it's been useless. It's been a waste of my time and effort watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. I mean, we did him such a huge favor. And how has he responded? He has paid me back evil for good. Then he invites God into the equation. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave one male of all who belong to him alive. In other words, I'm gonna murder him, I'm gonna kill his male servants, and I'm gonna kill his sons. That'll teach him to treat me this way. So we're gonna pause the story there, but here's what we have so far. We got two characters, we have two responses, and we have no hero, right? I mean, we have Nabal, we have David, evil for good. David did good, he responded with evil. David, who's about to do evil for evil. Nabal is somewhat maniacal, and David is about to be predictable. Who could blame him for what he's about to do? And sometimes, again, it just seems like evil for evil is the only option. Turns out, as I said earlier, it's not. There's a third option. We're gonna talk about that in part 2. But here's what I want you to do between now and part 2. I wanna give you 4 questions to think about. And again, I would prefer you not to think about these through the filter of other people, but just through what's going on right now in your life with the people that are difficult to deal with. You may not consider them mean people. It may not be an extreme, or it may be very extreme. But I want you to process these questions through the filter of what's going on right now in your life. And parents, I can't overstate the importance of this. Parents, I think you need to teach these 4 questions to your children, because your children have, or will face some very mean people. And their natural reaction, like our natural reaction, will be evil for evil, or to allow that person to continue to control them. And as a parent, this is so difficult to watch. And sometimes as a parent, it's tempting to coach our kids to power up, to return evil for evil, because we will feel better, right? See, these are 4 questions for us. These are 4 questions for our kids. Question number 1 is this. Do you want to be even with someone you don't even like? No, I already know the answer to this question. No, we don't. But our natural response to mean people oftentimes is an attempt to get even with people we don't even like, to be like someone that we would readily admit that we dislike. And again, we think somehow once we get even, that ends it, but that doesn't end it, right? That doesn't end the cycle. It actually perpetuates it. Recently, I heard Jamie Dickens say, it's not evil for evil. It just becomes evil for evil, for evil for evil, for evil for evil, for evil. It just goes on and on and on. So do you want to be part, or do I want to be part of perpetuating that cycle? The question number 2, wouldn't you rather be ahead? I mean, do you want to get even with someone you don't even like, or wouldn't you rather be ahead? Wouldn't you prefer to be unlike the person or the people that you dislike? And this is so, I said earlier, this is so not intuitive. But here's the thing, and when I say it, you know it's true. Unlike any other arena of life, you actually relationally pull ahead by refusing to get even. You actually pull ahead by refusing to get even. And that leads to a third question that we ask a lot around here within several different contexts. It's simply this. In fact, this is third question. Don't miss next time, because this third question is a question that the character that we will introduce next time actually baits David into asking about his own future. And the third question is this: when this is nothing more than a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? When your response to this current relationship is nothing more than a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? Do you want to tell the story that I ended up just like the person that I disliked because I allowed them to infuriate me into acting just like them? It's not a good story. It's not the story that any of us want to tell. And then the fourth question is the on-ramp to the solution. The fourth question is the on-ramp to pulling ahead. And the fourth question sets us up and puts us in this uncomfortable space that we know we probably should step into. And if you're a Jesus follower, if you're a Christian, you know with certainty you've been called to step into. But it's so uncomfortable. The fourth question is this: what would it look like? And you don't have to commit to this. You just have to have an internal conversation. What would it look like to return good for evil? Not just refuse to react or to react in like kind, but to be kind. Not just refuse to be bad, but to take seriously the words of Jesus, because he was so direct about this. I mean, a lot of things Jesus said we have a hard time figuring out. This is too clear. He said, I want you to do good to those who mistreat you. Don't just put up with them. Don't just forgive them. Don't just ignore them. Don't just try not to be like them. Jesus says, no, that's not enough. I want you to think through how to do good to those who mistreat you. Because Jesus knew that doing good to people who have not been good to us is ultimately what frees us, what protects our heart. Getting even is natural. It's predictable. Jesus has invited us to be unpredictable. Jesus has invited us to do something extraordinary. It's as if he's saying, don't be predictable. Don't write a predictable story. Write a remarkable story. Write that story that's worth telling. And what will determine whether or not that story is worth telling is not what the other person does, because you have no control over that. It is 100% right here in our decision whether or not to respond either in like kind or to be kind, to do good for those who have mistreated us. Remarkable begins with an honest answer to this question. What would it look like? What would it look like to return good for evil? What would it look like to do good to the person who has mistreated you? Because you don't pull ahead by attempting to get even. And we will pick it up right there next time in part 2 of Mean People. I'd love to pray for us before we go. Heavenly Father, it is so easy to stand up here and talk about it. It is so difficult to walk out the doors, or to show up at work, or to go next door, or in some cases even go home and do this. So would you please give each of us eyes to see our circumstances the way that you see our circumstances? And would you give us ears, Father, to hear your whisper when we ask that question, honestly, that many of us are afraid to ask: what would it look like to do good for the person who has not done good to me? Give us eyes to see, give us ears to hear, and then give us the courage to step into that scary, scary place. And in doing so, we know, because you promised us this, in doing so, we become like our Father in heaven. So give us the courage to take that step. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, thank you so much again for joining us today. Don't forget, on your way out, we're gonna give you this card. We'd love for you to start bringing school supplies next week for our backpack drive. And of course, if you have kids, don't miss the Parent Summit. Hey, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.